Hi, everyone. I just wanted to check if everyone can hear me. Everyone can hear me? Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon from wherever you're joining in. My name is Rashi Saxena, and I'm your host and moderator for today for the Youth and Digital Transformation Challenge to Media Literacy webinar. This is organized in partnership with DCN Global and Portulans Institute. I'm going to talk a little bit about Portulans Institute. It's an independent nonprofit, nonpartisan research and education institute based out of DC. And their areas of expertise include technology, competitiveness, innovation, readiness, and global talent. As a global member, I'm a representative of DCN Global from Asia, and DCN's global mission is to create a lasting impact through empowering new generation of global voices in digital communication. We serve an open space for communication, creativity, connectivity, media literacy, which is the topic for today, with the purpose of promoting democratic and resilient societies. And for now, I'm going to hand it over to Rafael to talk a little bit about the Network Readiness Index. Rafael, over to you.
Thank you, Rashi. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I think the topic is going to be quite important for us to discuss. So let's, without further ado, let's go to the presentation, and we'll talk a little bit about the results of the of the NRI rather, and we'll see what the connection is with the digital native. So let me present this in full screen for everyone to see. Let me know if that is working.
Yes, it works.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much again. So today we're going to talk about the Network Readiness Index 2022 and the results that we discovered from this research. And this is the result of a 12-month process. So let's move to what the report has to say about the theme that we're talking about today. So what is network readiness? What is the Network Readiness Index? So the index was developed by Professor Sumitra Dutta in 2002. It was launched by him and Professor Bruno Lanvin in collaboration with the World Economic Forum as part of the Global Information Technology Report. The idea of this report was to compile key metrics in the use of ICT for the development and competitiveness of different countries and regions. In 2019, we had the privilege to redesign this and to launch this from Portulans Institute. And what we did here is to make it a little bit more reflective and more human-centric, and to have this perspective of being a little bit more future ready. We'll talk about the term in a minute. So with this in mind, let me just quickly show you what the components of this index are. So the principle here is that the collective future of humanity will be a harmonious integration of people and technology. So before, we thought at some point that technology was something completely independent of development in human society. And I think the new version of the NRI since 2019 has a little bit more of this human aspect. And again, the structure is divided from technology to people, governance, and impact, and has a series of sub-pillars that range from future technologies to trust in the contributions that the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations and technology has to do with regards to this contribution. Now, going directly to the theme that has to do with the digital natives and how they will shape the world, we found a series of interesting findings. But before we do that, let me just show you and walk you through the results that we have overall, and what we thought it was the what we think rather at this point were the most important parts of this report. So youth and digital transformation are two of the important keys on how to on the results that we identify. And we have this two important elements in mind before starting the collection of data and the analysis of results. So of course, we are very aware that after COVID and from 2019 henceforth, the acceleration of society, the digital acceleration rather of society was moving way faster than before. So this affected mostly the younger generations that we call digital natives, those that were born when the internet was around, and for them it was just a second nature, you know, that this was happening faster. They, in our view, will be shaping the world, and they will have different priorities from the previous generations. And this is something very important that we have to consider. And to a degree, we have to take into account the readiness that they will have when doing this new change of processes and mechanisms. So this takes us to the future of work. So future, by referring about the future of work, we saw this changes again during this pandemic, and we realized that this youth, this digital youth that took over most of the work of previous generations, because again they were very prepared in certain areas of the globe. We'll see that in a minute. Those were making the definitions of what the workspace was, and they were prioritizing certain things like collaboration and flexibility, some things that we oftentimes forgot that were around, that were key elements of how work develops throughout the different groups of society. So this enormous group of entrepreneurs from this digital group of natives began growing and making impacts throughout the global economy. And of course, we saw the rise of things like the gig economy and the flexibility of working from different places and no longer having a standard office and whatnot. Now, this also had an enormous impact in education and skills, not only for the digital natives, but also the need to keep this system of formal education up to speed. And not only, again, for the generations that are entering primary, secondary levels of, including also tertiary levels of education, but also for those that also are part of the previous generation still working and who need to be prepared for this new wave of development. So now we see that the culture for certain organizations is basically data driven, and that the mix of skills has to do in this perspective more to a more, let's say, collaborative way in actions between the individuals, plus this digital skills. So this is a new mix that we haven't seen before. So with this in mind, let me just give you a walk through the rankings and the findings that we identified globally. Of course, it comes to no surprise that the USA is number one in the NRI. But what is very interesting also is to see that number 2 and number 3 are countries from different continents. So we have Singapore's number 2 and Sweden as the third one. And if you take a look at this, we only see, mostly see European economies with the exception of the Republic of Korea in the top 10. China and Malaysia are the only 2 upper middle income economies that China's in the top 25, Malaysia in the 36, that are among those high income group of top 25 economies. And of course, the rankings divided by these different pillars, we see how technology is led by the United States and 2 of the larger technology juggernauts in Europe, people, on the other hand, is mostly led in the top 3 by Southeast Asia economies, and governance is mostly European. Impact, on the other hand, has non-American economies among the top 3. Then we will have I can show you here that depending on the income groups, we see that some of the economies that top these groups are some of the economies that we identify clearly as highly developed. Unfortunately, we have Ukraine here among the lower middle income economy groups, facing a terrible threat of war. I mean, of the war that they're going through with the Russian Federation, who's also part of the upper middle income economies, ranking as some of the more network ready. But also we see that in Africa, the lower income economies, mostly African, are doing enormous efforts to accelerate the access to these technologies and to make the most out of it. Again, this is just a map that you can see by visiting the website. Again, this QR square over here can lead you directly to that, and you can do some more detailed research on each of these results. There's another thing that's important to see. There's this linear correlation between the score of the NRI and GDP per capita, which means the amount of resources that an economy has. And of course, we see the top 25 over here of mostly European and Southeast Asian economies, with a few exceptions from America. But we also see that some of the middle income economies are getting closer to that line, that bridging these gaps. So let's go to the key messages and takeaways that we identified this year. So the first message is that we are entering this new digital era. So this transformation, again, is showing this incredibly rapid upward movement of technology and the adoption that is happening throughout the world. And this is growing at an exponential level that has to be taken into account in any type of policy and planning development within specific economies and regions. And of course, we have to think about the enormous amount of data that's been created and the governance that has to go on top of that, because we saw things happening before about 20 years ago with social media and other types of data that has been available and collected online. And we don't want to have to face this again with some of the new technologies, etc. So we are entering this new digital era, and it's extremely important to have a clear vision of what has happened in the past and some of the outlines of what will happen in the future, so that we define proper lines of action to promote without curtailing any type of development. The second one is that digital transformation may create new inequalities. So 2.9 billion people, mostly in developing countries, still lack stable internet access. So if you add this to the enormous demand for digital skills that is, again, happening mostly in Western economies, we see that these disparities are creating enormous problems, and bridges are breaking between these groups of nations. So this is not only affecting the development in general economies, but it's affecting even more the younger generations. So we will have to have a view and have this in mind, that for this younger generations to harness these technologies, we will have to make them available for them. So it's something very important to take into account when defining plans and policies locally. The third one is the digital transformation remains a powerful way to do a lot more with less. So we were talking earlier about some of these African economies doing a lot with less. We see China bridging the top 25 among the high income economies. India is also another middle income economy that is moving very close to this type of development. And what we see is that they're changing the models they approach to do to approach these issues that we were mentioning before of education, access to technology, and they're trying to bridge things that we oftentimes give for granted in other regions. And we see this phenomenon in certain economies, and again, mostly in economies that are on the extreme of almost the lower income. They're doing a lot more with less, and this is actually having an impact on their performance, and of course, in the younger generations. Now, digital natives are like we spoke in the beginning, they're shaping the way work is going to, the future of work and how work is going to operate in this new digital era. There are new ways of doing things. I'm basically going to repeat some of the points that I mentioned when we started this presentation. We have to take into account and encourage this type of performance for the younger generations, and to adopt some of the processes that they have came up with. Formal education is also evolving, and this will continue to do so. So this is very important. Again, we have to provide the skills for this younger generations, but also we have to think about reskilling some of the older generations that will have to be competing among the within this new framework of technology and this new future workplace. Metrics are extremely important. I cannot stress this enough, because if we don't have anything to measure, or we can't measure anything properly, there is no way to try to improve it or have some action on top of it. So this is extremely important, and we can give you an example of what we did this year for the NRI. So we have we have a new indicator on GitHub data that identifies some of the countries where they have attracted some of the most qualified or most prepared labor hand on computing science and coding. And this is a metric that shows us how many of these economies are changing on the way they attract people, and how people are moving throughout the economy because of this new capacity to do so based on digital transformations. And well, with that, I finished the presentation on the metrics. This is our team, and I think we can move on to the next segment, and we'll talk a little bit further down the road on some of the aspects of Portulans. Again, I think my team and their technical advisory board, etc. So with this, I will stop sharing, and please, Rashid, I'm sending this back to you, and let's continue the conversation.
Thanks, Rafael, and thanks for the insight. It was really interesting to see, especially for me, someone coming from India. It's interesting to see that we're seen as an emerging economy. I'd like to start introducing our speakers. The first speaker we have today is Alex, who's the co-chair of the UNESCO MIL Alliance. Since we were talking about digital natives and how it's the future, Alex, my question to you would be, how future ready are digital natives, especially given the region that you're from? Digital literacy is becoming an important metric for active citizenship and civic engagement for the different policies. Do you think today's formal education provides the youth with the required skills and competencies for an increasingly digital world? And I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Hashi. First, I'd like to thank the Portulans Institute and the DCM Global for this kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I'm going straight to the point because I know we have a short time for each one. Actually, when we talk about digital literacy or media and information literacy, which is an umbrella concept that that UNESCO use and some other countries use, we need to, as the readiness index shows us, we need to think about which part of the world we are talking about. When we see the ranking of the NRI, we see that, for example, Latin America is a kind of lost because they are not in the edge; they are in the middle of the thing. You have Asia growing up in this, and Europe too in the readiness of network readiness. But what I can say is that it's fundamentals. It's kind of basic thing, digital literacy and media and information literacy as a way of an ethical response for this digital, for this new generation that are shaping the world. They will shape the world, natives, digital natives will shape the world because they have skills of navigating, but they need to acquire other skills. It's the part of the ethical part of the thing, and how to manage the digital fluency with the imbalance with this ethical part, which for me is in bed on digital skills and on media and information literacy. I'll give some examples here. The CNN used some World Economic Forum research to do a ranking of how formal education is using media and information literacy. And if you take two European countries like Finland and Estonia, of course, they have media literacy since kindergarten. Of course, in a very fun way to understand media for the kindergarten, but they grow up trying to read, interpret, and deal with digital media until the university. From the kid, I mean, at least you realize it's a lifelong learning process, and this is on the Network Readiness report from Portulans Institute too, and UNESCO underlines this. Digital literacy or media and information literacy must be a lifelong learning process from the cradle to the grave, as the European Union say when it touches lifelong learning policies. So public policies are different from all around the world. So I gave a European example, I'll give you some Latin America examples here. Chile appears on the readiness report and very well positioned on network readiness. And I would underline Uruguay too. UNESCO here made a research during the pandemic times. And for this generation that grew up with the pandemic times, Uruguay has public policies that they were amazing compared to other countries in Latin America, even with Chile. And they prepared the students and the relatives, the parents, to study with them, to have basic skills in digital literacy, to study with them. And they didn't get behind others. On the other hand, Colombia, Brazil, Peru, and Dominican Republic, they got in the bottom of the same ranking of this World Bank and UNESCO research that was done 2 years ago here in Latin America. So I think Ms. Chardonnelli can talk more about public policy, but I think public policy is a key way to understand this position, how digital literacy will impact this generation. And because it's fundamental, if they grow with digital fluency, they need to grow with digital ethics too. And it needs to come in the same way with the same strength. And this is what I believe for this generation. They are digital natives, but they are digital naives too. They need to grow up with ethical education at the same time to understand both parts. I will not extend myself for this public policies in Latin America, for instance, to tackle disinformation. We had a lot of public policy that failed in Central America and in South America. We are trying to get another more bold public policy to deal with that. But when we talk about, just to finish my answer, just when we talk about digital literacy within the formal education, we need to talk about artificial intelligence too. And this is a topic that for instance, we realize that the younger generation, they have it from the cradle, but the older one, they need to develop, they need to run back to the time to talk about AI. You can see what ChatGPT is doing, the impact is doing with universities right now. And this is part of the same subject that we are talking. They're not different subjects. Okay, so for instances, now I don't want to extend so much. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex, for that comprehensive question. My second question is to our second speaker, BB, who's an associate professor at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. So BB, technology and connectivity are two important factors in enabling young people to participate in democracy and the digital economy. However, young people in many developing countries lack access to connectivity, and it stops them from engaging meaningfully in the digital economy. How do you see this current landscape changing? Is technology going to amplify the digital divide rather than, closing it? Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Rashi, and thank you so much for the to the Portulans Institute and DCN Global for having me on this important panel. So my short answer would be a little bit of both. So that's the good news. So what we have seen, and Alex mentioned this, and Raphael mentioned this as well, is an acceleration of the uptake of technologies. And we've especially seen that with mobile technologies. So we see a lot more mobile phone usage across the globe. And that's the good news. So we see a lot more devices overall and people having more access. Now, if we start thinking about access in a more detailed way, it's not just a question of yes, no, do you have a device? Do you not have a device? Do you have access? Do you not have access? We also have to think about the quality. So if we start with devices, for example, what kind of device do you have? Is it a smartphone? Is it a phone that works well? Is it old? Is it new? How many people have to share the phone? Is it one phone per person that they have it with them the whole time? Or do they have to share it with the family? And then also, are other devices available? We know from research that mobile phones are great. They do get bridge some of those gaps, but they don't bridge them all the way. So are there other devices available, like laptops, desktop computers, tablets even? And again, what kind of device is it? How well does it function? Is it reliable? How many people have to share it? And it's the same with internet access, right? So it's not just a question of, do you have access or do you not have access? What kind of access is it? Is it mobile only access? Is it through a network? Is the network reliable? Or is the network one of those networks that goes out all the time? Or is it does it rely on satellite technology? So if you have cloudy skies or you're in the wrong region, you just don't get access at all if the satellite is not right on top of you. Or is it a really strong, reliable connection that is fast, that allows you to do a lot of different things with your devices as well? So, and we see those gradations not just between developing countries and highly developed countries. We see it within any country, really. So what we do see is that these kinds of gradations are generally speaking along the lines of privilege, right? So those who are more advantaged have better access, they have better devices, they have more of everything. So they get ahead of everyone else. And then another aspect that we need to think of is what Dr. Amy Gonzalez coined as technology maintenance. So do people have the means and the ability to maintain their devices, and not just the devices, also the internet access? So for example, if you have a prepaid plan, do you run out of data? Do you run out of minutes? Do you run out of text messages? Or if it's a plan that you pay monthly, can you pay it monthly, or do you have to prioritize other bills and then suddenly you're cut off for a month because you couldn't pay your bill? And the same with the technology. The older it is, the more likely you have to fix it, or it breaks down, or it doesn't work properly. So all of these things need to be taken into account as well. So while we do see improvements overall, so we do see a catch up, I think we really also, in the policy space, we need to pay attention to the quality of access as well. So that would be my parting message on this topic. Thank you.
Thanks so much, baby. Our next speaker is Dr. Nikos, who's the president of DCN Global. So Nikos, my question to you is, one of the areas of the NRI studies is the issues of trust towards digital technologies that fosters inclusive participation in the digital economy. So what is the importance of appropriate tech and data governance policies in fostering trust and driving overall engagement? Over to you, Nikos.
Okay, thank you all. I would like firstly to thank Portulans Institute, both Mariam and Rafael, that contributed a lot in organizing together with DCN this meeting. I have been intrigued from the beginning because Portulans Institute actually first letter starts from the Greek P, which is actually my surname. So I was really enthusiastic when Alexander suggested to bring us in contact, whom I really would like to thank as well, in order actually to have this opportunity to discuss and share these results that comes as part of an important survey that takes every year. So in order to respond to the question, I think regarding the just use of technologies and actually the just distribution, what we need to start is to start actually from this kind of surveys. Because in order to be able to discuss, we have to have a specific departing point, which is to record what is happening. Unless we record with a specific methodology, with a specific approach, we will never be able actually to discuss and analyze. Otherwise, we will turn our discussion like a social media discussion where everyone has an opinion. Doesn't matter whether it is based or not, but I do have an opinion and sometimes very strong one. The second element that I would like to bring at the forefront, and it is also it is present in the study. I think that we should have in mind that what we thought the division between the developed and underdeveloped world sometimes does not exist. Sometimes these two sides of the coin, we see them inside the countries that might be considered as developed. And here it relates with what Bibi and Alexander have argued before, that we have actually to change our approach in order to correspond to needs that are equally can be found all across the globe. Yes, there is an important issue in the access and the cost of the internet, etc., which is more than clearly evident in Africa, for example. But also within our societies, there are fragments of population that are being excluded. So to this end, I'm reaching my third point that I would like to emphasize, and it relates a lot with the just use of technologies. It is the emphasis that we should place upon data protection. Data protection as a key element, it really relates and connects with the use of with the just use of technology, because some segments of our population might actually, their personal data might be exploited because they lack the necessary understanding of the importance of our personal data. And secondly, because they lack the necessary means in order to protect their data. This is why I think that we should have to take into account these three important elements. And to that end, I would like also to praise the work of UNESCO in order to reach this kind of milestones, let's say. And I would like to add to their work the necessity actually to discuss further the notion that it is said here regarding the just use of technologies as an emancipatory mean. We have seen that recently, for example, in a very important conference that we have organized as DCN Global with the support of Educational and Exchanges Office of State Department in Costa Rica, where we have seen the benefits that the use of technology bring to a society as Costa Rica. And I was really amazed by that. Despite that I'm professor, I tend to speak exactly on time and not even take 1 minute extra. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Nikos, for being so prompt. Our next speaker is Mariam, who is the Senior Policy Associate for Portulans Institute. Mariam, my question to you is, another important factor in fostering digital participation is safeguarding online privacy. Do you think digital natives are getting increasingly concerned about privacy from governments and corporations? Or is it something that they're willing to compromise in order to access digital services? It's a very interesting question.
Thank you, Rashi, and thank you all of you for joining the webinar. I think when we talk about a group as large and diverse as digital natives, it is indeed hard to draw precise conclusions on this topic, especially when we consider how access and exposure to the internet can vary from not only regions to countries and also within certain countries, which is something that Professor Nikos outlined in his speech. So at the end of the day, this does affect public perception of privacy, how much exposure and access you get to digital technologies, but it is still possible to observe some interesting trends when it comes to attitude of digital natives towards privacy. And there's this widespread misconception that digital natives don't care about privacy as much as older generations, so-called digital immigrants, did. And I think the key reason behind this misconception is because digital natives were born when technology was already available, and they have integrated technology in pretty much every aspect of their lives. And they pursue lifestyles that are both enabled and fueled by digital technologies, whether it's their private life or work style. And so people just are quick to assume that just because they are they have so deeply relied on technology, they are quick to sort of compromise their privacy for the sake of being able to have access to the benefits. While I think a lot of these people overlook the possibility that digital natives, being young and technologically fluent, they're also better able to apply granular filters to how they, how others see their information on social media, or how, different governmental or private institutions collect their data. And so if we look at data, and there have been some interesting research conducted over the last few years, two of which that comes to mind are Pew Research Center as well as in Internet Innovation Alliance, they show that over 60% of young people, mostly teenagers, they apply very specific privacy filters to make sure that they control how their social media uses their data. And I think less than 6% of people actually have their name and last name publicly visible on their social media accounts, which is a very interesting trend. And over 70% of millennials are concerned with how different private institutions as well as governmental institutions use their private data and personal data for, advertising, marketing, targeting, and so on. And this is in light of most of them saying, over 60% of them saying that they've never received any formal, informal privacy or online safety trainings. So I think that is also a very interesting trend. So I think if we look at the data, we can see that digital natives are not as careless with their data as one might suggest initially. If anything, this is the generation that cares about creating their digital personas more than previous generations did. So they want to have more agency over how others see themselves, how others see them, especially in social media on platforms they want to establish themselves. So I think this is an interesting conversation, an important conversation to have, to make sure that policymakers are aware that there is a popular demand from this generation for privacy-friendly regulation, and this is something that's been widely cared about. But also not only for policymakers, but it's also an important thing for businesses to realize, because Gen Z will soon dominate the customer population, especially in the US. In a few years, they will be the majority of the customer population. And this is a generation that not only cares about customized shopping and checkout experiences, but also about privacy. So this is something that policymakers as well as businesses need to sort of strike a perfect balance for and care about. So I would say overall, digital natives do care about their personal data and privacy, and they will care more about this in the future. Thanks, Rashi.
Thanks so much, Mariam. I have one last question for Alex. So over the past years, a lot of the social media platforms such as Meta and Instagram, Twitter and TikTok have become enablers for youth engagement, participation, also perhaps started the influencer culture. And the internet and social media have provided strong platforms for a lot of young people to express themselves, especially disadvantaged groups, to have their voice heard. How do you see the future of this trend, and what can be done to support it? Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Hashi. Yeah, once more I miss more things to talk. It's a weird feeling, but let's go. It's not a privilege to have two answers, because I think I forget more things to say. But the first thing is that, yes, of course, we have groups of people that didn't have any voice before, and they are finding opportunity to express themselves through social media. And social media has been a platform to boost business, to boost social cause, to boost social activism, everything. As Professor Nikos said, we have met in Costa Rica, and we saw a lot of experiences like that. And I can see with my students, and even with myself. I'm very old, but not too old. I still use this social media for this kind of thing. But on the other hand, I like to underline what Mrs. Chardonnelli said about the AI. They are aware of their private data, but there are other ethical impacts that AI should have now and for the future. I would say algorithm bias, algorithm transparency, and a lot of different things. And then we get into a point that I will address this point here, because unfortunately I would not be fair if I don't say this word here. It doesn't mean that I agree with that, but it's a point that everyone is facing, is that regulation of social media and AI. That's what's happening around the world. Europe is debating an AI regulation. Latin America has a very poor document circulating through the presidency in different countries. I'm following up. They are terrible. They need to be more bold for that, but the European model is going better if you compare all around the world. Everyone will debate this following year, the role of the platforms into everyone's life. For instance, the UNESCO meeting for Global MIL Week will be in Jordan last week of October, and the theme will be the role of social media in media and information literacy and regulation. What I believe, my personal side, is social media can educate. And that's what I talk all the time, what I do here in my projects of lifelong learning projects here in Brazil. I think media in general is not a matter of self-regulation only, but can media educate the users to use other platforms and other things regarding the artificial intelligence aspect, or the digital aspect with no algorithm, or the mass media, because the mass media in some countries are still huge. We need to understand that television and radio are not that. They play a role in some countries. So we live in a very controversial and complex times, and we need to look for all these aspects when we talk about the potential, the benefits, and the other aspects that digital media or any kind of communication can provide for the youth to boost. But I'm an optimistic. I tend to agree with your question, Rashi. I think we have an opportunity in our hands, and this group had an opportunity to boost their social activism and business, and drive the business the way Ms. Chardonnelli was talking. how are you going to find all these young people as the main consumers all around the world? And I think for countries with huge populations like China, US, and Brazil, and India, this kind of countries, we're gonna find it fast. And how to deal with that? This is the big question. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Alex. And I do feel like we do have 10 minutes and we can perhaps take 2 or 3 questions based on the length of the questions for panelists to answer. So do we have any existing questions at the moment? And if anyone from the audience would like to ask questions to any of our panelists here. You can paste them on the chat, or you could perhaps, is there a possibility to also unmute and ask them?
I think writing in the chat is the only way for doing that at this point.
All right.
Yeah, we can wait for a couple of minutes in case someone else has a question, but there's something I wanted to ask all of the speakers to elaborate on and to have their opinions on, which is, you know, this edition of the NRI focused on youth and digital transformation, and you know, previous edition of the NRI focused on you know, leveraging technology to bridge the digital gap. And I think this is really important. How do we ensure that we can correctly leverage technology to bridge the gap rather than creating new digital divides? I think this is a very complex question. There's a lot that comes into play, from policy to education, which is something that we mentioned briefly. But if anyone would like to elaborate on this further, it would be great. And I think we also have a question about digital ethics in the chat, which I think was referred to Alex as a response to his previous response.
Can I respond to what you just have mentioned, Mariam?
Absolutely,
And then
Lucas. Go ahead.
the floor to Alexander. So, before the webinar, I made the promise not to speak that much. Okay, so I think it's a crucial question, and I think that I will actually respond by taking into account what it has been said before. For example, can we rely on self-regulation of big techs? No. We need actually public good intervention in order to bridge this digital divide. Can we rely on philanthropy, providing some computers to rural areas, etc.? No. I think that was evident in your previous report as well. We need a policy that it will be consistent. It will be a global or regional policy. As you can understand, I'm in favor of globalization, not registered with the ones that they fear globalization. And I think that it is crucial and important a cross-regional collaboration in order actually to be able to pass over good practices and examples. I will just mention only one, and then which is stands out of what I'm just saying. We are developing a program that has been developed actually in Finland, in Germany as well, where journalists will be trained in order actually to teach young people how some aspect of media literacy as well as how to tackle disinformation. And I think it has been introduced in Brazil as well, Alexander. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikos. Did you say that you want to move to Alex? Actually, we have 3 questions. We do have 3 questions as well. So I'd request Alex to, if it responds, to keep it a bit short, given that we are running out of time.
Yeah, I will answer that question of ethics. Yeah, that was in the chat. That is important. The first question. Yeah, I translate digital ethics as media and information literacy skills, which is to use, analyzing produce and participate to the digital world, aware how the things work and protecting themselves using digitally digital safety for themselves, and using it to participate to the democratic system, to the societies, to the day-by-day life, to make the days easier, to the daily basis easier, and also, of course, to be citizens, because you need that to participate to the governments of your country. That's how I translate digital ethics. I translate to media and information literacy skills, which I think it's not only concentrated in fluency. That's what I mean. You need to open these skills to other skills, which is a bench of skills that we need to develop during the formal, non-formal, and informal education.
Thanks, Alex. So the first question is if anyone here can elaborate. I think one of the biggest concerns in the online world today is disinformation. And it is clear that current media literacy programs have a positive impact on youth. How can these be scaled for digital immigrants, if at all? So who wants to take that? I'm going to read it again, it's slightly longer. One of the biggest concerns in the online world is disinformation, and it is clear that current media literacy programs have a positive impact on youth. How can these be scaled for digital immigrants, if at all? We have any takers from the speakers?
I think
maybe
Nico's
Bibi?
given.
Go ahead.
Or,
Yeah,
sure.
Bibi, do you want to go ahead and then I can complement as well?
Yeah, this is not my main area of research, but the one or the biggest issue that we have here is that digital immigrants are not necessarily or likely to be in formal education settings anymore, right? So it's not something we can implement on a large scale in a setting where they can't escape it, if you will. So what is happening here in the US a lot is that we have digital skills classes for older adults who might not be as familiar with the technology, or also the pitfalls of the technology. And so we see this scaled a lot through libraries, for example, community centers. We see a lot more faith-based organizations picking up these kinds of skills because they do recognize that this is a big issue for older generations as well. And that there is this lack of formal education spaces where they come across this almost accidentally, right? How this can be scaled is a different question that I'm not sure how to answer. Maybe Nikos or Alex have some thoughts on that.
Yes. Alex, do you want to go ahead, and then I can just directly respond and then pass it to Alexander. What I suggest that it is important that we have to approach media literacy as a civic education. It's not as a technical component, which means that it according to my approach, it will not be successful if, for example, we teach them X, Y, Z programs that can identify disinformation. What we have seen as Descent Global with many initiatives that we have realized in Armenia, in Greece, in Italy, etc. What we have seen is that it is more than important actually to be engaged with the young people, and especially also with the digital immigrants. We should not only emphasize in digital natives, okay? We should also include in the discussion of digital immigrants as well. We should emphasize on the following question: why people tend to share this information despite that they know that this is a fake news. So this is why I argue that we have to approach media literacy as a civic education, which means that it's not only a technical aspect. It needs to be addressed as as understanding the value of information, protecting their data, how they use their data. And the last thing it is that we need actually to engage all the stakeholders. This is why I have mentioned actually how engaging journalists with young people, etc. Thank you.
I see a lot of questions on the chat now, and some of them being DM'd to me. So let me, okay, there's one interesting question on what new can be done to include youth as co-leaders and co-owners in digital transformation policies. This is the question from Alton Brazil from UNESCO. Who wants to take that?
I can try to tackle that question somewhat. So I think the process of finding the right solution or finding the right approach to something starts by understanding the problem and the needs. And so the needs of digital natives in different countries can be different, and in different sectors can be different. So I think when we talk about elaborating a policy on many different things, we need to talk to people that are the beneficiaries of this policy. So if we're talking about how we can empower digital natives to become co-leaders, and we need to talk to them about what resources they need to, be more entrepreneurial, become decision makers, start their own companies, get funding, create business processes that drive digital transformation internally and beyond their, specific countries and locations. So as a co-founder of a startup myself, I've experienced this firsthand, and I know that a lot of the times the assistance you get from the government or private sector is not really what you need. And there's a lot of, useful information lost in translation, which would have been resolved by identifying who is the beneficiary of this process, talking to these specific target group, identifying the needs, and also talking to them about how they would address these needs if they were the decision makers. And then by doing so, not only you provide them with the right resources, but you also train them in the decision-making process and looking at the problem from not only from the perspective of someone who is experiencing the problem, but also from the perspective of someone who is in charge of resolving this problem. So by doing so, you automatically empower them to want to become leaders who will then assist other people in resolving the other problems that they are experiencing. So this requires really targeted and dissected approach, and it's really hard to address it in one go, I think. But this process really starts by uncovering the problem at core.
Thanks, Mariam. I do have another question that says something on AI. How can artificial intelligence help in securing our data properly? Maybe I could take that. When you say data properly, do you mean data? This is a question by Amir Siddiqui, and maybe you could clarify. When you say data properly, do you mean how can it be safer and secure? And maybe, or are you looking at it from a documentation point of view? Because I feel like artificial intelligence is as good as the training data sets that you have and that it works on. And the training data sets for any system that artificial intelligence is used for is going to be biased, because as humans, we're all naturally biased. And one way I also feel that if you're looking at data privacy and security is also looking at anonymizing data sets, looking at increasing the layer of data sets, having data sets, for example, if you're looking at content moderation issues from social media companies, you need to have content moderators that are ideally from the region who understand the language. I feel like we do have a lack of training data sets in different languages. I know we're running short of time, so I can't expand further, but I hope that answers your question, Amir. And we have 2 more questions, actually. There's one which says, what needs to be done to occupy digital spaces with media and information literacy for global citizenship? or in other words, to massify media and information literacy in digital spaces to address disinformation and hateful content?
I can take that if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Alex. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, Alton Grizzle is the guy in UNESCO who takes care of media and information literacy. Probably he's a little bit tired to listen to my voice, but I'll try to answer this question. I think the answer is in Nico's answer too, because I think it's a matter of coalition. We are all responsible for media and information literacy. I understand that my first question was addressed in formal education, but I need to confess that formal education is a very conservative environment all around the world. To get into the curriculum of this thing it's hard. So this is why there is this aspect that media and information literacy, and to occupy this space is it's a lifelong learning process. So it's not concentrated in basic education or in high school or in university. You need to go further. Two, you need to use the media itself to promote MIL. And then quoting Ms. Chardonnelli, that the youth need to occupy those spaces and to play an active role on the digital transformation too. And we do not need to forget the mass media too. For example, next week in Paris, UNESCO is organizing a huge event on platforms, internet and regulation, which is very important. And they're gonna release 3 MOOCs on MIL, open MOOCs. And one of those MOOCs is a radio-based MOOC in podcasts to reach regions of the world that don't have full access to the internet. They're going to be distributed by diplomatic pouch, so by air. So what I mean is that in flash drives, yeah, to use in flash drives in community radios. So what I mean is that 1 is a lifelong learning process, and 2 is a matter of a big coalition of all professionals involved on MIL. It's not a matter of schools and universities. It's a subject for everyone.
And I'll just add very quickly to, because this might be something interesting to the person who asked this question. There's also interesting developments on the European continent, especially with the recently adopted EU Digital Services Act within the European Union, which recently entered into force and which is supposed to provide like a holistic protection of users on digital platforms to make sure that they're prevented from seeing hate speech, misinformation, and to also protect them from data breaches and privacy violations. This is something that most of the large digital platforms will have to comply with. Just to echo what Professor Nikos was saying about, we can't trust big tech to regulate itself, but there is a need for uniform decision-making and policy-making. So the European Union is making a step towards that. And within the next few months, we'll see how successful the regulation is going to be. And maybe that's going to be something that other countries will replicate.
Yeah, no, and just to add to that, online hate speech was recently adopted into, I would say, global charters when it comes to an acceptable definition of hate speech. And big tech shouldn't be the overarching powers here because they don't necessarily understand the difference and the consequences of how online events can actually have offline consequences, especially in conflict zones. Where it's very important. We have one last question, and of course, how can we miss? It's related to ChatGPT. So how could we face the crucial challenges of new AI technologies? These would come under generative AI technologies, such as ChatGPT-3, in order to enhance our active citizenship. So that's the last question. Who wants to take it?
If I may add something to that, I think that in a relation with the very useful and very interesting report that has been presented regarding the network readiness, I think that we have to approach the issue by understanding to what extent and how actually AI can further this readiness in terms of adding a very crucial technical capacity. But if we take it from the other end, what it comes out of this research and also of the challenges that arise from AI technology is actually to see from the end user, where in order not to be trapped into a world where some people will have access and the benefits of this type of technologies, while the other ones will be struggling actually to have the basics. So more than ever, I think we are all enthusiastic about what is taking place with AI, etc. But we should never forget people that they lack this kind of access. Now it is the time to act. Otherwise, we will witness a digital divide that it will not be able to address it. And secondly, we have to see it from the end user to the extent and how ready is actually to exploit this kind of opportunities. Plus, for us, the professors, how to verify whether what we are receiving is from AI or from a real person. Thank you.
It's also interesting to see a lot of the plagiarism softwares having a direct partnership with ChatGPT to avoid that. So I'm glad that's been sorted out. I'll hand it over to, before I hand it over to Rafael, I want to thank everyone for joining in, the speakers, Portulans Institute and DCM Global for organizing this. Yeah, pass it on to Rafael, and just to the audience, thank you so much for joining in and a lot of your questions. Yeah, we're happy to over to you, Rafael.
Thank you, Rashi. So I echo your words. Thank you to you, to Bibi, to Alexandra, to Mariam, and of course to Nicholas. So last 30 seconds of this, I just want to say that it's very important to see that this is also a developmental problem, and we have to definitely work on something that helps the fair distribution of this type of technologies. And the problem is all this as history itself. So we have to also think about the past when we're thinking about this future technologies and this readiness of how to be prepared for what's next and the things that we don't know. Of course, we spoke about ethics, quality of access, fair distribution, and of course, data privacy and protection, and all of the things that are affecting these different realms of the technology and the development of these new approaches to development. But one thing I want to answer, and just with this I will conclude, is that I think answering also one of the questions is to occupy how do we occupy this type of conversations, this type of policies? How do we do this to be part of this? Is by activities like this one, and by activities I'm using that word because that's a word that entails a simple version of something. So I think that by doing events where we have people here involved in the conversation, not only a one way, we are occupying these channels, we are helping with this development, and we're not only throwing this out as something that democracy or the market will just solve by itself, because we've seen horror stories of how this is not happening. We saw this, I don't want to even mention dates, but we saw many things here that happened because we didn't occupy these channels with the right rhetorics, with the right conversations, with the right questions, and with some of the good perspectives based on ethics, based on quality of access, based on fairness, based on many other things that we've been able to measure. We've been able to understand a little bit through these type of studies. So once again, thank you everyone. Thank you everyone for organizing this. Thank you DCN Global for reaching out and organizing this, and to everyone else that sent questions, that participated, and that had the time to listen to us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rafael. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Have a nice
you.
day. Bye-bye.